not a secret that the Oklahoma defense was not up to standard in 2022. It has to get better. It's got to get better. And Brent Venables certainly believes it's going to get better. We've heard from him. We got Parker Thune on the line, OU Insider, also 1460 Sports Talk, and also 94.7 The Ref. Hey, Parker, how are you?
How's it going, Mark? Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Good to see you. Brent Venables, of course, had his introductory news conference for spring practice and made a few major points on the defensive side. One, hey, we got pushed around last year. We got bullied, and we're not going to let that happen again this year. The other is he's extremely happy and optimistic about some of the young talent coming into the program on the defensive side of the ball and believes that they will be much, much better.
Yeah, certainly. And I think when you look at what Oklahoma accomplished, or more accurately, didn't accomplish on defense in 2022, it's clear that what kind of jump Oklahoma makes last season to this coming season is going to be largely dependent on the contributions that they get from the newcomers. It's going to come down to how ready some of their signees, some of the guys that were towards the back end of the depth chart because they were new last year. What kind of a leap can those guys make in terms of their ability to produce and play key snaps right off the bat? Because this is a program that was 99th in the country in scoring defense out of 131 FBS teams. They were 122nd in total defense. Mark, that's not good enough at the University of Oklahoma. That's not good enough anywhere to play winning football. And so you bring back a lot of the same characters, guys that played good ball at times, obviously, and Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman and Woody Washington. You lose some key contributors like Jalen Redmond, Jeffrey Johnson, David Igwebu, Deshaun White. But as I look at what Oklahoma brings to the table defensively in 2023, I think the key distinction that you have to make, and one of the reasons why there is so much optimism that things are going to get better, is because there's so much more depth. Last year, Oklahoma did not have that. They might have had personnel, but they ended up sending 16, 18, maybe even 20 players to the transfer portal, most of whom were on the defensive side of the ball and just weren't good enough to play snaps at a place like the University of Oklahoma. They did not live up to the standard in terms of their physical ability, in terms of their ability to process the demands cognitively of all that comes with stepping into a Venables scheme. And so the Sooners have reloaded. It's been a facelift for this defense. You have a lot of the same guys that played better ball than their peers for Oklahoma last season. And again, Stutzman and I think Billy Bowman are the two guys at linebacker and safety, respectively, that were probably among the top overall performers across the entire roster last year. So having those two guys back is big. They're both rising juniors. Woody Washington returns for his fifth year as the go-to or the lockdown cornerback, the guy that's in all likelihood going to be matched up against the opposition's top receiver. And then you bring back a second team, all Big 12 pass rusher in Ethan Downs. So there are some incumbents that have some promise, but those guys have to improve. So too do the younger guys have to step up and prove that they are a far superior alternative to the depth chart fodder that Oklahoma had scattered across this defense last year. And that's part of the reason why you saw the Sooners' three starting linebackers, Stutzman, David Igwebu, Deshaun White, all play north of 85% of the defensive snaps. There was just nobody that could step in and fill that void if somebody needed to spell them. And so with that increased depth this year and more confidence in some of these young guys, when you look at the top 100 signees that the Sooners landed on the defensive side of the ball, Peyton Bowen, P.J. Adebawore, Makari Vickers, Samuel Masigo, things are going to get better. And the reason things are going to get better is because the Sooners, for the first time under Venables, actually have legitimate depth.
And getting back, Parker, to the comment that Brent Venables made about getting pushed around, and no defense wants to hear that, and no guy that prides himself in defense wants to hear that they're, getting out physicaled, as people say, up front. But they bring in some reinforcements up front with some guys that were pretty darn effective where they were, and especially a guy coming in from Wake Forest that played at the Power 5 level.
That's right. Rondell Bothroyd, been a multi-year starter at Wake Forest. He's entering his 6th year of college football, so he's a 1-year rental. Trace Ford, the transfer from Oklahoma State, enters the fray. So too does Devon Sears, a transfer from Texas State, and Jacob Lacey, formerly of the University of Notre Dame. So the Sooners brought in a lot of experienced veterans who have played plenty of snaps at the FBS level before, with the intent that they would, at the very least, provide a stable option if none of those younger guys prove that they're ready right off the bat. But I think the best case scenario for Oklahoma is that your rising sophomore edge rusher in R. Mason Thomas, that guy takes a jump. He's already up from 222 pounds last fall to 239 as of the release of the spring roster a couple days ago. So that's a guy that many have identified as a potential breakout candidate. Talk about incoming true freshman guy I already referenced, PJ Adebawore, the 5-star edge rusher out of North Kansas City. There's nobody on Oklahoma's roster right now that has his physical traits. If you're talking about the highest ceiling edge rusher on OU's roster, it's that guy. If he is a plug-and-play dude, if he's ready and he proves he's capable of getting past Power 5 offensive tackles right off the bat, make no mistake, he's going to play. So the Sooners have a myriad of veteran options along that defensive line. But to be honest, Mark, I think the best case scenario is that those guys are at the very least pushed and perhaps even supplanted by some of the newcomers and some of the younger guys along that depth chart.
And to put together what you're saying, and again, what Brent Venables talked about the other day, optimistic because he believes that they recruited well, but maybe those guys weren't ready initially for a number of reasons, not ready to take on what is a more complicated scheme than most across college football. And maybe number two, you know better than I what the emphasis was on strength and conditioning and bringing this strength and conditioning program to a new level under Brent Venables. And a lot of guys, especially young guys, aren't used to that. They're not accustomed to that. They get worn down, and it may take a full off season and now 2 off seasons to get ready to play major college football and get their bodies ready for that kind of wear and tear.
Absolutely. And I think throughout the off-season workout program, throughout the experience of getting up to speed in Jerry Schmidt's regime in the weight room, a lot of these guys are making tremendous gains, and a lot of the guys that aren't, well, those are the same guys that got processed last year, right? So you find out real quick which guys can hang and which guys can, as far as the increased physical demand of simply staying in game shape in the new era of Oklahoma football, this new administration that Brent Venables is heading up. And so, there are guys that have already embraced the challenge. And I think one of the things that is key when you look at Oklahoma's recruiting class is they recruited a lot of the right types of people, not just the right players, but the right people, guys that were going to come in and embrace the challenge before them and work their tails off to try and get better and present a challenge to the veterans above them for playing time right off the bat. And you look at the gains that some of these guys have already made in the weight room. PJ Adebawore is up from 226 pounds to 238. Eric McCarty is up from 168 pounds to 185. Josiah Wagner from 162 to 171. I already mentioned R. Mason Thomas as a sophomore, so he's not an early enrollee, not a newcomer, but that guy's up from 160, or I'm sorry, he's up from 222 to 239. And so you're starting to see a lot of these guys make big leaps in terms of their weight. And that's one thing that stood out about that Oklahoma defense a year ago is there were a lot of guys that just weren't physically ready to play high-level Power 5 football. Yeah, they were capable of playing Power 5 football, but they didn't have the strength, the stamina, the endurance to be able to hold up, and for Venables and the coaching staff to be able to trust them and rely on them to give them quality snaps game in and game out.
When Parker rips off weight additions like that to the T by the pound, you would think that would be one of the reasons we would bring him on. But it's more about putting all that into context. But that's mighty impressive. Catch Parker on OU Insider, Sports Talk 1400, and also 94.7 The Ref. Parker, complete this statement for me in regards to the defensive side of the ball this spring. This is a big spring for Are there any particular players that you really think need to show something this spring heading into August?
Yeah, certainly. I think there are guys that need to show something because they're probably on their last go round in terms of either proving that they can play or just getting shuttled out the door. I look at a fifth-year senior edge rusher in Marcus Stripling, a guy that I was very, very high on early in his career, but developmentally he's kind of plateaued. And now you have a logjam of other edge rushers that are in the picture for Oklahoma. And so if it doesn't click for that guy this year, well, then obviously he's done with college football, so he doesn't even get a mulligan. It's now or never for him. Same thing for Jaden Davis, the fifth-year senior defensive back. But I even look at the safety room and a guy like Key Lawrence, who's a redshirt junior. He's got some ball ahead of him. But throw Peyton Bowen into the mix, throw Robert Spears-Jennings into the mix, Texas Tech transfer Reggie Pearson enters the fray, and there's a ton of pressure on Key Lawrence's shoulders to be able to live up to the standard and be able to perform to a level that he did not perform at for much of the 2022 season. He was very inconsistent, especially in run support. So that guy is another example of player that it kind of feels like now or never for him. And hopefully some of the veterans that are feeling that heat, some of the guys that realize, hey, I better be able to put it together here in 2023 or I'm about to get leapfrogged by this freshman or this sophomore or this guy that redshirted last year and I didn't even really feel threatened by, but now he's made the gains in the weight room and I haven't. Hopefully at Oklahoma, those guys take that challenge in stride and rise to the occasion, because if you can get quality contributions from your veterans because they feel the healthy competition from the bottom up, when you have the next generation coming in and a generation full of very, very physically gifted football players, the likes of which Oklahoma hasn't recruited in quite a while, that only helps your bottom line.
Parker, of course, it's been fun for all of us to speculate with Oklahoma moving to the SEC, what that schedule is going to look like, and that schedule format that's being worked on right now by the various SEC schools, and we believe may come out during those destined meetings in Florida at the end of May. I think there's kind of two levels to it. There's that group of teams or that one or two teams for most programs that they have to play. And then there's that group of teams that, it makes sense. So when I look at, when I put together the entire deal for the SEC, and Oklahoma has to play Texas, of course, then there's Arkansas. You can make a case for Arkansas. You can make a case for A&M. You've got Missouri. You can make a case for that, series that goes back to the Big 12 days. Where do you stand on Oklahoma's permanent opponents?
Well, to be honest, Mark, to the best of my knowledge, for probably 6-7 weeks now, and this kind of lines up with the report that blew up on social media from Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated. The best of my knowledge, it's looking like Florida is going to be one of Oklahoma's permanent opponents, which I love. Obviously, you got to play Texas, as you mentioned. Seems like Missouri is a safe bet to be another one of the permanent opponents. But if you got to pick a number 3, man, I don't know if there's a school I'd rather have Oklahoma play year in and year out than Florida, because I think those two programs have a lot of parallels. They obviously have some history. When you think back to the 2008 national championship game, Sam Bradford versus Tim Tebow, the Gators outpacing the Sooners in what was Oklahoma's most recent appearance in a national title game. And moreover, you got two of the great traditions, two of the great, most storied organizations in college football in Oklahoma and Florida. With the Gators having the opportunity to come to Owen Field and the Sooners return the favor in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium, I think that's a game on which there's going to be a lot of eyes trained every single year. And would you like, if you're a team like Oklahoma, would you like your non-conference, or your permanent conference schedule to be Texas, Alabama, LSU? Sure, but you're not going to be able to have your pick of the litter like that when you got 15 other teams that need to have their schedules aligned with yours. And so there's going to be a clunker somewhere along the way. It feels like Missouri is that for Oklahoma, but you preserve a historic rivalry in OU Texas. Obviously, that's never going to go anywhere. I think there really is the opportunity for a new rivalry to emerge between Oklahoma and Florida, and I'm super intrigued to see what that will look like 10, 15 years down the road as those programs get used to seeing each other every single season.
Then I got to think, Parker, that there are portions of the fan base that are taking the other end of the spectrum to say the SEC is going to be difficult enough. Give us the easier games. We'll take Mizzou and Arkansas.
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind seeing Arkansas on the permanent schedule if I were Oklahoma, because that fan base is ardent. Fayetteville is right up the road, about a 3-hour drive from Norman. And so I think that could be your replacement for the Oklahoma State rivalry, which kind of goes by the wayside with Oklahoma making that transition, right? So that could be your new Bedlam, that series with Arkansas. But if you have to sacrifice Arkansas on the altar of getting an annual matchup with Florida, again, I think that's a net win.
Fortunately, even if you don't get the permanent opponents that you want, we're going to be in a scheduling format that you're still going to see the rest of the league every other year, or at the outside every 3 years, as opposed to what's common currently in place in the SEC and the ACC, where if you don't have a matchup with that team outside the division, you're not going to see them for 6 or 7 years. So at least that's going to be fixed. And if you don't get the permanent opponents you want as a fan, you're still going to see those teams frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way it's set up in the new SEC, right, is you play everybody at least every other year. So non-conference, I think I'm more curious than anything else is to see what Oklahoma's non-conference slate looks like annually after they make the transition to the SEC. I'm not sure how much that changes. I'm not sure what becomes of the matchups that are already on the slate, whether those are preserved, whether those are revisited. I would like to see Oklahoma make the trip up to West Point to play Army, which was a road trip they were supposed to make back in 2020. But then obviously COVID-19 happened and threw a wrench in everything. So you're going to make the rounds in the SEC. I really like the new scheduling format. The only natural question that leaves is, well, okay, what does Oklahoma's non-con schedule look like in the SEC? Because I think the criticism that a lot of these fans within the OU fan base have of the SEC scheduling model is you've always got that late November matchup between Alabama and the Citadel, right? Or LSU and Savannah State. And so do you still get that? And you hate to term it a throwaway game out of respect for the opponent, but you got to play an FCS opponent in November every year. Once you make the transition to the SEC, that'll be an intriguing storyline to watch.
Absolutely. Parker Thune, OU Insider. That's 247 Sports and Sports Talk 1400 and 94.7 The Ref. Parker, we always appreciate you stopping by, laying down the knowledge.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks.